I try to never tell one of my clients no. A request I've had a bunch of times over the years is for a custom-made door. They might do something like buy a piece of stained glass somewhere that they wanted to fit into a door and they couldn't find a door to go in. Or maybe they've got a special size opening, or I've even done this. They had a door that they wanted to match. It's pretty simple to build a door if you just use the techniques we've already learned about and the tools that you've already got. What we've done is assembled a couple of frames, and we just pocket hole jointed all the material together. We're going to make 2 frames and put them back to back so we end up with an 1.5 inch thick door. Now, the other things that go on with that kind of depend on the style door that we're building. If this was going to be open for a piece of glass, we would rebate down from one side, let them put the glass in, and then we'd have stops on the other side that would hold the glass in. The door that we want to make today is going to be a 4-panel door that's going to very closely match the details that we've already got in the room. If we were going to come into that really nice room and just put a couple masonite doors in there, they'd stand out like a sore thumb. So what we're going to do instead is create a very custom door using the same moldings and the same detailing of all the other things that are going on in the room. The first thing that I'm going to need to do is rebate down to the edge of this frame enough to accept a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. Well, half of a piece of 3/4 inch plywood actually, because half is going to come in from each direction. If you look at this frame, you can see that we've already done that. So the plywood panel is going to sit wedged in between the 2 pieces, and then we'll use our molding to trim that out. If you wanted to make a craftsman style door, you could probably just stop right there and you just have kind of a square edge detail. But I like to put a lot more detail on there than that. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my router bit and I'm going to rebate down in here half the thickness of a piece of 3/4 plywood. One thing that I forgot to mention, it's really important when you're drilling for your pocket holes that you keep them back in from the edge enough so that when you go around rebating around the edge that you don't hit them with your bit. The second thing is, on a cut like this, I usually climb cut first, which means I go the opposite direction that you would normally go the first pass and just take a little bit out. And that makes it a lot less likely that something's going to tear and chip out and ruin this piece. So that first pass, even if you only go an 1/8 or 3/16 in, it gives you a clean edge, and then you can go back the way you would normally route and hog out the rest of it. Now, I always tell people you want to be very, very careful when you're climb cutting. Don't try to take too much material out when you climb cut, and keep your arm in tight against your body so you've got really good control of the router. It takes a little bit of practice, but it can be very, very beneficial if you're careful what you're doing. Well, this is a really great way to mess up your workspace. Now that we've rebated that out, the next step is to cut some plywood panels that are going to fit down inside this frame. And if you notice, we end up with a radius corner when we route. I could come in and square those corners out, but that to me is a lot of work. So what I'm going to do instead is just round over the corners of my plywood panels, and I'll just get a radius that gets pretty close to matching that. That's fairly forgiving if you look at it. The way that I'm going to try and round those over is I'm just going to use a belt sander to radius the edge of my plywood. All right, let's see if this one fits. I've already got my other 3 panels in place. All right, now for the next step, we're going to have to do a whole lot of glue spreading, but we're going to bring the other frame, put it on top of this, and then we're going to clamp it up with a whole lot of clamps. Now, I've got some really nice clamps that I use, but you don't have to have a lot of expensive clamps. Just standard pipe clamps will work. You're going to need a clamp that puts a decent amount of pressure on, though, and it might even be one of those deals where you need to, borrow a couple buddies' clamps, because I'm going to want to clamp this about every 6 to 8 inches all the way around the perimeter. We really won't do any clamping in the middle. If it turns out that the things aren't sucking together well in the middle, what we're really probably going to end up doing is we'll probably just push them together and put just a couple nails in the middle, which won't really be noticed. Again, that's more just about to hold the plywood panels in than anything. We're going to get all the strength we need by gluing the perimeter of these two frames together. Probably going to want to leave this clamped up about a half a day once you do it. If it's in the middle of summertime or something, you might be able to unclamp an hour and a half. If it's wintertime, you might want to leave it clamped up overnight. Of course, you'd also want to make sure that it didn't get down below freezing in your garage. Another thing you probably need to know is this is not a job for one guy. I'm going to need to have somebody help me again. Now, just as a point of reference, we used about 3/4 of a pint of glue on here. Pretty well down. Now, something else that's important to know, we've oversized this about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little more than 1/8 of an inch, because we're not going to try to get these just perfectly lined up. As long as we get them close, we're going to come back after we've glued it up and clean up the edges the way we want to. Okay, let's go try one out there, Dan. We're getting glue popping out everywhere down the edge, which is what I'm looking for. All right. Okay, well, we've got this totally clamped up now. The only thing we may try to do is push this down a little bit in the middle, and probably going to end up needing to shoot just a couple small nails in here to hold that in place. We're going to let this dry for about 3-4 hours, and then we're going to come back, clean up the edges, and then we'll be putting our molding on. Now that the glue's dried and we've unclamped this door, we're ready to clean up the edges, and the top and bottom will have to be trimmed also. We're going to use a table saw set on about a 2-degree bevel. A door should have a little bit of bevel away from the face, and that'll keep it from hinge binding, and it'll also make it to it'll close a little bit at a little bit tighter opening, so it'll be less tendency for it to drag when it's open, and also it won't hinge by as much if it's beveled away from the face. You could do this if you don't have a table saw, or if the door's wider than your table saw will rip. You could do it with a good straight edge and a circular saw that's just put on a 2-degree bevel. We're going to trim across the end using a track saw, but again, you can do the same thing with a straight edge, a couple clamps, and a good circular saw. All right, now here's my molding. As you can see, it's got a rebate that sews something by 5/16 maybe by 3/8 or such, and you just have to kind of check the door and see exactly, fine-tune that a little bit. I did this with a dado head on a table saw. Now, I could try and individually fit these joints right inside here, and I do that a lot of times, but the technique I'm going to try to use now is to actually pin these pieces together in a frame and then drop them in, and I'll use this marking gauge to make sure I keep a constant reveal off the edge. And it should work a little bit faster that way. Of course, I was very, very careful to cut these exact, and we've got a good sharp blade. All those things you need to do to get the best cuts, because when you get good, accurate cuts, you got a lot better chance of having good joints. I'm going to be using a 23 gauge headless pinner. I'm not going to put glue in there because these are really small pieces of molding. And one of the real advantages of this is I can pin through from the underside where I couldn't get a nail after I've got it put in there. On that inside, I just kind of take a look down to make sure it looks straight. All right, I got 2 put on, and now I'm going to start on the longer ones. All right, that's not bad for homemade. And truthfully, there's been a lot of times that I've gotten jobs just because people have seen that I'm able to do custom work like this. And I'm really proud to say that I can do just about anything the client asks me to do. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this material, don't forget to like and subscribe.